Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Am I audible right at the back? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, all of you. I think it's great to be here with all of you on this platform and share whatever little I've learned. And through the course of this session and through the day, hope to learn something from all of you as well. So it's really a pleasure to be here. To just briefly introduce myself, so I head offline payments, sales and business development for Amazon Pay. Prior to this, I was head of strategy and operations at PayPal. I was also one of the founding leaders at Zeta and spent some time as director on the board of multiple companies. So let me just check if we are good. Okay, we are good. So today, essentially, right, like, so over this next 15, 20 odd minutes, we'll be covering three topics which should be of interest to all of you, right? So essentially, how are we looking at digitization in businesses, right? And what are digital payments all about? And what are some of the innovations that have happened in payments which have really spurred this digitization, right? And I honestly believe that digitization, for any business, whether it's a startup, an SMB, or a large business, is really the way to scale, right? If you want to really scale your business and grow, you have to adopt digitization. And through the course of this, we will look at, how some firms have been able to do that, really successfully, and what is in it for all of you. Okay, so it's a very interesting statistic. Like, so if you look at India as a country, right? We have embraced digitization tremendously, especially over the last few years. All of us know that the pandemic has only accelerated digitization, right? Like, if you think about the kind of digital embracement that's happened over the last few years, we've probably covered in 3 years what otherwise would have taken a decade, right? And data proves that. Like, so if you look at India, the number of businesses that have taken a digital storefront for the first time, right? So which I'm basically saying that, let's say you have a business who is predominantly offline. Let's say the first time he actually took a digital storefront to go digital, 27% of our businesses did that, right? And that was more than many other developed countries, right? So it gives a sense of, how much, we have really taken this to heart and, made it happen. Okay, very much digitization is on the move, right? Like, so if you look at the 40 million odd small and medium businesses, more than 50% have digitized, right, over the last few years, okay? And it's very interesting, right? Like, people might think that the phenomenon is only a metro and a tier 1 phenomenon. Not really. You go to tier 3 cities, you go to tier 4 cities, right? There is a more than 40% digital adoption that's happened just over the last few years, right? It goes to show the extent to which people have really adapted and grown, okay? So I think the question to ask is, what is driving all this, right? Like, now so much digitization is happening. What is really the tailwind, that's making all this happen, right? The first thing is in terms of really the large size of our unbanked population. So as they say, right, your top of the funnel is super high. So there's so much people, who can come into getting digitized. There has been a spurt in terms of the kind of data that is, come into the whole country, right? Thanks to Airtel, Idea, Jio, etc. The data has become cheaper. Data has become like all pervasive, right? And that has really definitely helped digitization expand, okay? Not to mention, right, if you look at our demography, I think across the world, right, we know that India today has the best demographic dividend, right? So what do we mean by that? So we are no longer a pyramid, right? Like, we are like more like a pentagon. Like, if you look at our demography, so we are not this anymore, we are more like this, right? So what does that mean, right? So it means that a lot of people, whether it's the millennials, Gen Z, etc., like over the next decade, are ripe to get digitized, right? And that's already happening, And what has really helped this? You would see that a lot of regulatory pushes happen. And in some sense, right, we are fortunate to be in a country where the push towards digitization has happened on so many fronts, right? Whether it is through Aadhaar-enabled payment systems, eKYCs, right? Whether it's through account aggregation, right? Whether it's through DigiSign, all of these have only enabled the acceleration of digital payments, right? And we really need to be, thankful for that. What is all this led to? We have like more than 300 million people who are digitally active, right? And more than 1 billion getting added over the next few years, right? That's really what this means. And the spurt has happened because of data on one side and the device penetration on the other side, right? And these are tailwinds that, most of us are, very, very well versed with. Okay? So now, we keep hearing, okay, digitization, right? Sometimes we think, okay, what exactly are people saying when they mean digitization, right? Are all of us thinking the same thing when we use that word? Now, the interesting thing is, for any business, right, digitization can happen across functions, right? Which means whether you're looking at sales, marketing, finance, accounting, any of your key functions, right, you can use digitization as a very strong lever. What does that mean? So, to give you an example, right, so if you digitize your financial records, right, and your transparency increases. When your transparency increases, your credit score increases. When your credit score increases as a firm, you're able to access loans at a much cheaper cost. You're able to access, firstly, and access them at a cheaper cost, right? That's why, it's so important that, you're able to bring in that level of, transparency in your financial records. Now, you may be a retail business, right, who is mostly offline. But if you want to go digital, you might want to use digital platforms, right? They could be social media platforms. They could be other digital platforms where you want to engage with your customers, right? Now, this really is the Facebook, Insta world, right? Like, if you want to really engage with your customers, right, you need to be out there, right? And like my friend Abhinav mentioned, being with customers is really the cream, right? Like, everybody wants to connect with the customers. And for you to be able to do that, the digital platforms are among the lower cost, scalable models, right? So today, like, if we all are here in person, there is a limitation in terms of capacity, correct? Capacity of this hall, capacity of the number of people who can come here. But imagine that if this event were to be streamed over the internet digitally, look at the number of people, who have access to this event. The same analogy is used, even in businesses, right? Like, if you want to be able to access your customers, then going digital is a faster way to access a lot more customers than any other means, right? And that's very true, of the era that we currently live in. Okay? Now, moving to payments, right? And that's something which all of us are familiar with. Last few years, we have seen an increase in the number of payment modes that are available, right? Whether it is QR codes, whether it is POS devices, whether it is, the ubiquity of scan and pay. I mean, no longer people don't look at a QR and think, like, they just open their phone and scan. That's the kind of pervasiveness, that we have reached, right? And what has that happened? That has accelerated digital payments. And I will cover that, a little more in detail in the next section. Now, what has that meant is that, that has lowered cost, increased revenue, and gives all the benefits, to a firm, when you adopt that, right? Similarly, you pay your taxes online, you do your ledgering, accounting, etc., digitally. All of that, increases convenience, right? For you, increases the amount of analytics, that you can bring to your business, etc., right? So, we touched upon digital payments. Maybe I'll ask for a show of hands here, from the audience, to a quick question. How many of you, right? How many of you, over the last, say, few weeks or so, left your home, right, knowing fully well that you have to purchase something, but you did not carry your physical wallet or purse? Can I have a show of hands? How many of you left home knowing you need to buy or transact, but you didn't carry your wallet, right? That's a good number, right? That's a fantastic number. Now imagine, were we at this place even 5 years back, 7 years back? Absolutely no. We weren't at this place, right? As a country, like we were cash, cash focus in terms of how we used to transact. It's increased, the digital penetration has increased significantly that all of us, feel comfortable enough, to be able to just move, knowing that, okay, I have my phone, right? I can scan and pay. That's a beautiful thing. Like, for you to be able to think about it, right? And I'll just give you a small example. You will appreciate the power of UPI when you step out of the country, right? When you step out of the country and you need to make low-cost payments or zero-cost payments instantaneously, you will appreciate what we have, right? Like, you appreciate the power of, what we have. And that's really what, UPI has done, right? In terms of, significantly expanding the reach across the country. So what has happened? So with all this, there has been a tremendous acceleration in payments, right? Like today, we are talking of 70 billion transactions annually. We are talking of 130 trillion rupees worth of digital payments annually, right? And the last one is very interesting, right? Like 20 years back, or give or take, we were at 3% in terms of digital versus cash, just 3%. Right now, right, we are around 45%, and we are poised to touch 60% over the next few years. That's cash versus digital for you, and digital is definitely winning over cash, right? That has real benefits for our economy, right? You know that there is a cost that we incur in terms of printing cash, reprinting cash, etc. So the more we go digital, the more we benefit the country, right? We should definitely, keep that in mind, right? So, they say that, the amount of money which travels digitally in the country today is worth the GDP of almost 21 countries. That's the kind of scale that we have achieved over the last few years, okay? What has definitely accelerated this, for good or bad, the pandemic has definitely made its mark, right? The fact that digital payments, irrespective of gender, age group, geography, has made it really all pervasive, right? Everyone has adopted to it. And these are stats, which clearly, mention the same, all right? UPI, like I mentioned, has grown to almost 40 trillion rupees over the last few years, increased by more than 50x over the last few years to really accelerate, what payments has been, right? And I think, it's something which I really feel is, something to be really proud of, as a country, right? The kind of architecture that we have built in terms of UPI. And numbers depict that, right? And you can see the kind of growth that has happened in terms of UPI, in terms of the billions of transactions, that we now do annually. Okay? So now with all this, so where do we stand, right? Like what's next? That's always the question, right, that we have. What's next? What's new? What's going to be better, right? Like how will things change, right, over the next few years? So how will things change? I think I'll pose an interesting question, right? If we can ask what will change over the next 5 years, 10 years, etc. But an interesting question to ask will be what will not change, right? What will not change? What will not change is that consumers will want faster, better, more reliable payments, right? Today, used to instant payments. You're not going to say a few years later that, no, I'll wait for a minute. I'll scan and wait for a minute. You're not going to say that, right? You want instant. In fact, you want better, right? So that is not going to change, which means that consumer preferences for faster, better, reliable, secure transactions, right? And overall, digitally enabling themselves, that is not going to change, okay? So what are some things, that could drive all of that? The first thing is, biometric authentication, right? Some of it we have already seen, whether it is through iris, fingerprint, palm scanners, all of that, is playing itself out as innovations, that have happened, in our payment systems. Next, what we call as multiple use cases, for a single point of sale device, right? Earlier, the legacy point of sale devices where, you just had a card reader, it would print a bill, and that's about it. It's changing, right? Some of you would have already seen it. You go into a shop, along with a card reader and a mobile phone, the shopkeeper can run his entire unit, entire business, right? He can run his entire business, including CRM, including inventory, including invoicing, including collections. All of it, he can run through just this simple phone and an app and a card reader. Right? Even a card reader is optional if he's just going to take UPI. Right? So that's where we are getting to. So essentially, we are consolidating multiple payment modes into a single instrument in some sense, right? So if you think about it, that's what happened to our mobile phones, right? Earlier, you would, probably I'm talking 10 years, 15 years back, you had a different instrument, say a digital camera for taking photos. You had another instrument for messaging. Then you had another instrument for making calls, etc., right? And another probably for accessing the internet. The smartphone brought everything together. Think about it, right? As a customer, your smartphone brought everything together, right? You don't need now multiple instruments. The same thing is happening for a business at his store, right? For a business at his store, he does not need now a POS device, like a separate machine for to read his bills, a separate scanner. Everything is getting integrated into one solution, right? And the power is that through those transactions, the business can actually get credit, right? He can avail lines of credit, from firms because now the transactions are monitorable, and through the transactions you can avail the credit, right? That's very powerful, right? And that's some of the innovation, that's happening, across various startups and businesses. Okay, some more. So we've heard of voice-based payments, right? And we all know that voice is something that's increasingly becoming something that we all use, right? Whether it's Alexa or Google Home or whatever device, even your smart watches, are able to recognize voice now. There is the same phenomenon playing out in terms of what's called as UPI 123 Pay. Now, what's this about? Now, we spoke about UPI, right? And what do you need? You need a smartphone, you need an app, and then you're able to pay. Have some of you thought about what happens if you don't have a smartphone? How will you pay? If you have a feature phone, right, and you have to use UPI to pay, how would you do that? Any answers? Any answers? If you have a feature phone, right, if you have to use UPI to pay, how would you pay? Yes, brilliant. USSD was one of the earliest things that came in terms of being able to type and pay. But it was becoming cumbersome for users, right? And also people who typically feature phone users are typically a large segment of them are in the bottom of the pyramid, right? So they needed solutions which they could enable through voice. Okay? So NPCI very recently released something called 123 Pay. What does that mean? So if let's say I have to transfer X rupees to the gentleman there, I pick up the phone, I dial a number, right? I say that I want to transfer X rupees to the gentleman. What does it understand? It understands that I have a UPI ID. The receiver has a UPI ID, right? It asks me to authenticate my UPI PIN on the phone, and then the transaction happens at the back end. It's simple, but very, very powerful, right? It's just starting. It's just starting through voice. And there are multiple ways they're enabling this, right? You can give a missed call, you will get a call back, or you dial a number, you have an IVR, etc., where this is really happening today, right? And imagine, the thing is, we are in this hall, we usually think of ourselves, right? Now imagine a farmer. Imagine a farmer in the field, right? So every day, let's say he has to pay his workers some wages. Think of how convenient it is for him to just pick up the phone and say, "Aaj inko 20 rupees dena hai." Right? It makes it super useful. And that is what digitization should be about, right? It should be about touching every person across the economy rather than it being to select, right? Only when you expand it to the masses have you truly achieved innovation, have you truly achieved scale. This will enable that, right? Other thing which will enable, like I mentioned, is voice-based payments, right? Some of you might already be familiar. If you're using any of the voice devices at home, you can ask Alexa, for example, to pay your electricity bill, to pay your mobile bill, to check what's your balance, etc., right? You can already do that, okay? Yeah, anyway, that was the last slide, but just one small point there was in terms of the transaction sizes that they had enabled. Right now, it's 200 rupees per transaction and 2,000 rupees for your wallet balance that you can keep. That's what it is meant for. Okay, so that's pretty much what I had, right? And I'm happy to take a few questions if some of you have based on what we discussed. If you put your hands up, we can pass the mic. Any questions? Okay, I see a hand there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I see that UPI Lite, something like we can do the transaction offline.
Yes.
Where it currently stage? It is in progress or it is released?
They have released a beta version of it, right?
Okay.
It just released a few months back. It's being piloted at different stages. So the idea is to test, see how it's working, and then come back with a full-fledged product. It's an NPCI release.
Okay, it's something like similar to RBI's offline payment using cards, similar like that?
You mean
technically, I'm asking something technically.
Sorry?
Technically, I'm asking how it's work.
So it works through a concept called device binding, which means that you link the device to a certain wallet that you need to preload. And the wallet has a limit, like I said. That's the underlying concept. But it is the genesis was from the RBI's thought of driving offline payments. So you're right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other?
Mr. Vijay,
Okay.
since we are
If we are good, yes. So I'll oblige her. And thank you for being a wonderful audience. Enjoyed the opportunity of being here. Thanks so much.